Welcome to Splunk Talk, a Splunk podcast that's all Splunk and no junk. I'm your host, Burch, here with my co-host.
My name is Hal.
This is episode 11 of season 2, and today we're going to be focusing on inheriting a Splunk deployment. And we'll soon be joined by a plethora of guests. But before we go any further, let's check in. Hal, how are you?
I'm doing okay. My day started a little bit. I'm a little bit frazzled, so I'm going to try to use this moment to unload a little bit and maybe get to a place of zen before we record.
So you're a little miss frizzled. I don't know why I said that. Keep going.
Yeah, no, keep your day job.
Let's just plow through.
We've got pets and pets have accidents, and we had to have some carpet replaced, and it's happening right now. And there was a little bit of scheduling issues where I didn't know exactly when the carpet was being installed, and my wife did within a range, and that range is larger than I was comfortable with, and I didn't know how much time I had to prepare the 2 rooms. So it was one of those things where last minute I had to totally empty my daughter's bedroom, and there was a lot of stuff in it. So this morning, I was literally sweating.
How old is she?
I was moving. She's 9.
Okay, because there's a big difference between if she's 3 or 40.
Yeah, there's a big difference. So my 9-year-old daughter, she's got a lot of stuff and there's a lot of purging that needs to happen, let's say. And I was forced
The Toy Purge coming to theaters, not during quarantine.
Yeah. But it was, anyway, I got it done. It's just, I didn't expect to have to clear the room out in 18 minutes, running, sweating. And yeah.
Wow. So they're going to be removing the carpet.
Yeah. And placing the carpet in 2 rooms.
And so that carpet will then be junk.
Yes.
Okay. So we've already violated our one principle of this show, that it's all Splunk and no junk.
Okay. That carpet was nasty.
Yes. Oh, I believe that there is merit to the junkiness of said carpet.
Okay.
I think it's great that we start every episode by saying all Splunk and no junk, and then immediately find a way to talk about junk.
Well, we will be getting into things that are more Splunk and less junk here shortly.
Let's talk about how this topic came to be.
Yes, please.
The impetus. Would you do the honors?
Yeah.
You lived it firsthand.
On the Splunk user group Slack team, which hopefully many of you are familiar with, there's a channel called, I think it's called Where Do I Ask? Or something like that. And somebody tagged me, and the question that someone had raised is, with the community, is basically there helping people understand who to talk to, where to go, what channel, and so on. And it was a question about Splunk Talk. And the question was, hey, I just inherited a Splunk environment. This came from Mike Brown, by the way. You've been outed, Mike. And Mike wanted to know, he wanted to hear from and know about, people inheriting, a Splunk environment and, the challenges and such. Took us a little while to get the timing together, but we're happy to serve. And but I got tagged on Slack with that. We had a little interchange. I was like, what, that's a great idea. So we figured we've got a lot of people at Splunk who used to be customers who have inherited Splunk deployments. So that's kind of what we took as the seed of putting this episode together.
Yeah, and the thing that's also really interesting is we have an entire manual on our documentation for inheriting a Splunk deployment, and the authors of that manual have been known to do conf talks on the very topic. Mm-hmm. So I think
we're mixing it up, right? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 potential guests here coming on in a minute.
Yeah, we've got six guests that have been through this as customers who now work at Splunk. And then if we get our act together, our next episode could potentially be with the doc writers, kind of keeping a series going part one, part two, if you will. And that also explains why there was a bit of a gap between when this episode comes out and the last episode. We needed a little more time to get scheduling for so many brilliant minds.
Oh, they're brilliant?
That's
like an added bonus.
That is an added bonus.
Okay.
We have an underlying requirement that our guests must be brilliant. They must have beautiful minds.
That's nice. That's nice.
Yeah, compliments.
So what have you been up to?
Something that that we talked about in the episode with Chris Gales about documentation is I finally shed my books behind me.
I see. The wall is much different and bare.
Yes. So I haven't figured out what I want to decorate it with other than the last printer that exists in the commercial market. But
that is I wish that we could be done with them. I have a printer that we use not often, but fairly often, and it's usually related to the kids' schooling.
So this serves more as a scanner than a printer.
Yeah.
I definitely bought this for the scanning capabilities, and part of like digitizing my world has been putting all that stuff into the bits and getting rid of it from the home.
Yeah. Well, I do a lot of scanning with my phone. I at one point
Does that work? I haven't had good experiences.
It works really well. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of apps that will Google Drive, Evernote, Microsoft Office Lens. Those are some three that I would pick that, they will handle the skewing correction because you're not going to be 100% right in front of the document, and they'll do some black and white, normalization, blah, blah, blah. So for documents, it works pretty well.
Nice.
Just need a little bit of light. So are we going to let all the people in and then start talking to them, or are we going to talk to them as they start to trickle in?
Well, I feel like we should acknowledge them as they start to trickle in. So we have because I did not set up the waiting room. But hey, Mark, thanks for joining.
Hey, Burch, how you doing? Hal.
Howdy.
Hey.
We could turn the waiting room on. It could be just the Mark show. And we could decide whether or not we could kind of vote. Hey, Andre's in the waiting room. Should we?
Is Mark being good enough that we don't need any more guests?
Well, it's too late because Andre just showed up.
Yeah, you haven't talked to me yet either.
Yeah, we don't know the answer to that question yet. Hello, Andre.
Hey, Andre.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. How are you?
Hey. So, Mark, where are you dialing in from? And then Andre, where are you dialing in from? And by dial in, no one actually dials anymore. So,
no. So I'm in Lothian, Maryland, which is about 30 miles east of Washington, D.C. in southern Maryland.
Very cool. You've got 3 on the east coast of the U.S. then. Andre, how about you?
I'm dialing in from from Berlin, Germany. So
awesome. So 4 on the east coast of the U.S.
Oh my God! Not sure if they want to hear about it. Okay.
So Andre, I have to ask you: do you know of the city of my namesake there, Rothenburg?
I heard about it. I've never been there. Sorry for that.
Me neither. I need to go there sometime.
No, you have to. It's beautiful. Yeah. I'm sure.
Well, I've not been to Europe enough times, so but when I get to Germany. The definite stop is going to be, there's a lot of stuff to see, obviously, but I've got to hit Rothenburg. I mean, how can I not go, find a city sign, and look for Rothenburg? That'd be pretty neat.
Of course.
All right. We have a third and a fourth guest just popping in.
So David Paper is joining us, and Brian Cusick.
Yeah, what's up, Burch? How are you?
Hey, how's it going? Funny thing about Brian, that's the real background, right? That's not a virtual background.
That's the real, it's more messy than everyone else's. So yeah.
Yeah. So the cute thing about Brian's background is I have seen that background in many meetings. Brian, would you care to share why so many other people at this company use your living room or office as their virtual background?
It's a great question. I'd have to attribute it to my wife's decorating skills and hours spent watching HGTV. So everyone went remote, and when I built this house, I kind of included an office in it. So I guess people like it. And here we are. I've seen all the way up SE leadership use this somehow. So you pop on calls and there's my office. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, Jeff was saying that he just asked you to like scooch out of the way, and then he took a screenshot or something, and then it spread from there. Yep,
pretty much. And now there's even an autumn update if you haven't noticed.
Yeah,
don't mind the yoga mat, but yeah, we're seasonal now apparently.
That's funny. I this is the first time I've had the pleasure, but I have seen the same kind of phenomena happen a couple other places. And it's usually like, how can we prank the boss or the big boss is usually what it feels like. You know, there's Peter Polizzi, his office has been the background of many people in some Zoom meetings.
He has a lot of stuff in the background of his.
He does. Let's say hi
Brian,
to David.
Where in, Brian, where are you time zone wise?
East Coast. So I'm actually in, believe it or not, it does exist, central New Jersey. So about an hour and a half away from Manhattan.
All right. So everyone, including Andre, is on the East Coast of the U.S. Andre's calling in from Germany. And David Paper.
A little bit more Eastern.
Yeah, right. Hot from his, this is David's first meeting back from vacation, I think.
I wouldn't quite go on and say vacation, but close enough.
David, what time zone are you in?
I'm also in Eastern, Northern Virginia.
There we go.
Oh, wow. That's funny. So do we have a Josh coming on? Did Josh confirm? Or are we rolling? So
we've got you, me, Josh declined. We have Andre, we have Mark, we have Brian, we have David, and Heather didn't respond. So I think we've got a full house.
Awesome. So
much for our attempt to have diversity in this group.
Okay, we failed at that. And
at least we tried.
Yeah.
Right. So thanks everybody for coming on. This is a first for the podcast to have quite so many guests. I think has it just been one interview at a time, Burch, or do we have two?
Yeah, the most squares we've had is 4 when before Jeremy, our producer, went on maternity.
Right. Okay. So no problems. We're not scared or nervous in any way. But
yes,
we just have to, think about handoffs here. So, but the name of the game here today is that we want to talk to everybody about what it's like to inherit a Splunk deployment, and what the things that you might want to think about first, and some best practices. But before we do that, let's get just a little bit of background from each one of you. And I'm just going to start with Mark because you showed up first. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Mark.
Yeah, and as you do that, let's keep the focus on what was your inheriting experience from a high level.
Yeah, that's the one we want to hear about.
Yeah, we don't care about the rest of you.
So I'm Mark Houston-Ludlam from Lothian, Maryland. Been doing Splunk for about 5 years. Prior to that, I've been doing pretty much system engineering, a lot of performance analysis over my 4 decades of experience, everywhere from fighter jets to big data processing systems. So that's been a lot of fun, a lot of interest. I've got to the point about halfway through my career realizing it's just data, and that served me well at Splunk. It's just data. My first inheritance was my first exposure to Splunk. One of my teammates at a government contract had done a proof of concept, and then the manager gave it to me to make it real. We'll get in more of that later. And then second inheritance was an already running system that was doing about 100 gigabytes a day in VMware. So that's what I do Splunk-wise. I enjoy skiing a lot. I'm an adaptive ski instructor for people with disabilities. So that's how I spend my winters, and summer I just have to work, I guess.
So what do you do for Splunk today?
I'm a professional services consultant in PubSec,
Awesome.
Concentrating in the Washington, D.C. community.
Okay,
so to translate, our professional services are the folks that come on site, or not these days, but help
we do.
Yeah. Oh boy. Typically come on site to do the implementation work if you hire that consultant package, and then PubSec is our public sector business. So if you were to separate commercial business from our public sector business, that's government, education, etc.
So let's go over to Andre from Germany. Hello, Andre. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi. I will try to keep my German a little low. I hope that's okay. I'm Andre Pietsch, like the fuzzy fruit from Germany. I live in Berlin now. I lived in Hamburg and worked there for a customer of Splunk. So as maybe everybody did in their time, and I actually started using Splunk in 2015 and was just thrown out into the Splunk world and fresh out of the egg. I had to present what my company is doing with Splunk on Conf 2015. That was a huge deal. Worked for the second largest retail company here in Germany. Might have an idea who the first could be. And I inherited an environment that was already running for 5 years prior to when I took it over. And in the end, it was a 700 gigabytes full-fledged with all the bells and whistles that we have. And I even tried to run it in AWS with Terraform. So something like what we are doing right now with Splunk Cloud. Not so professional, I would say. Yeah, what am I doing for Splunk right now? I'm a sales engineer or solution engineer. I'm not sure what the wording is right now. And for the field sector here in Germany, Northern Germany especially, and help my RSMs to make heads and tails of all the things the customers want to have. And good thing that I can bring to the table is especially this perspective from a customer. What was the thing that I was concerned about? What were the things I didn't like? What were the things sales tried and so on, and that I didn't like as a customer? I try to bring this to the table, and then hope that they will make better choices or better deals, opportunities here. Actually, I met Burch at Conf 2015. Yeah, and for the first time when I did some boot camps there, that was very, very exciting. I met a lot of people there who had environments like, we have 2 or 3 terabytes, 10,000s of clients, and I'm pretty new to it. And I thought, oh my God, I'm really lucky to just have a 700 gigabyte environment to deal with. That was very, very interesting for me. Especially also, it was the first time for me out of Germany, but out of Europe, in the US. And back then it was in Vegas, I think, 2015.
I was going to say that. I think that was the last year at the MGM.
Yeah. Oh, the MGM.
Awesome. So let's go to Brian. Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So Brian, out of Jersey, as you guys know. Been at Splunk almost 2 years now. I am now went from sales engineer to consulting sales engineer with a focus in security, which sounds like the same thing I was brought on for, but with a different title. So pretty cool. And I support the entire East for field in America. So pretty fun, from Maine down to Florida, and then somehow over to Texas, which could be cool once we start flying and we can get some barbecue, right? So, been doing that for almost 2 years now. Previous to that, I was at a partner doing managed services, professional services, kind of all things Splunk, from implementation. Started as, an admin taking tickets for data onboarding requests or troubleshooting, something like that. But quickly moved into the kind of, hey, we have a new customer that signed up for our MSSP, our SOC services. Take their Splunk environment and make it how we think Splunk environments should look, which a lot of the times involves ripping open cans of worms and, getting to the bottom of it, whether you wish you had or not. So I have tons of details around that. I'm sure we'll get into that later, but definitely some winter stories there. And before that, I was actually at a customer myself, an investment firm over in Jersey City, New York, and just doing security engineering there and owning Splunk ES. So tons of fun.
Excellent. Last but not least, Mr. David Paper.
I think least.
Feeling the love, Birch. Feeling the love. I too am a solutions engineer, Mid-Atlantic field team. I've been at Splunk a little bit more than 5 years now. I feel like one of the grizzled old veterans. And my initial Splunk inheritance was a very small instance, 15 gigabytes. That's not a typo. Back in 2009. And so I got a chance to get my feet dirty with Splunk early on and grew that environment fairly quickly over time. Got all the way up to 95 gigabytes, and I was ecstatic. Even managed to get distributed Splunk going and index for clustering. When 5.0 came out, it was a real adventure and really gave me the opportunity to finish sort of digging into all the nooks and crannies that were going on in Splunk under the covers at the time. So these days, as a solutions engineer, I am looking back on my experience in one of my previous roles at Splunk, which was a technical smoke jumper in escalations, similar to what some of the regional architects in PS do, but from a sales perspective or from a support perspective. So I would spend time at customer sites for a few days at a time and effectively virtually join their team and really try to figure out what's going on in an environment. So I would say I kind of virtually inherited it for a few days, dug deep, made some recommendations, helped the customers better understand what they've got in front of them, both good and bad, because, well, let's face it, every customer does a few things wrong and does a few things right. And it's always nice to let folks know when they are doing the right thing, because really, if I was there, it's because a lot of the wrong thing was happening.
That's interesting. So everything in your perspective, that's something we should acknowledge about all of us in our new roles is at some point we probably inherited deployments in a very innocent manner. But like David was just saying, if he got engaged with someone over that part of his career, it was because there was a problem. Yeah.
And if it got to me, it was after, maybe some PS folks had taken some tries at it, support had taken some tries at it, and we weren't able to crack it. And so I would take a look at it from a more holistic perspective, falling back on 15 years of operations experience, right? Not just running applications, but also hosts and networks and storage and understanding how all the bits and pieces fit together, because it turns out Splunk is one cog in a very large ecosystem that is, a data platform. And inheriting not just Splunk, but all the things that go along with a big data platform is not trivial. And it takes a fair amount of wide berth knowledge if you've got it. And if you don't, that's okay, as long as you know where to go find it. And the other people you work with and the other folks at customer sites that are not the Splunk admins may actually have information that the Splunk folks desperately need and just haven't thought to ask for it.
So I want to pull on a concept that you said, and I think Mark said it as well, which is systems engineering. So this is the part that has nothing to do with Splunk per se, but when you're building something that is large and complex, there's a set of practices that you find are more important and some that need to go away when you're building a large system. And Splunk is definitely a case where, like you said, you're going to have to dive in. There's going to be a lot of pieces, and just understanding the complexity and figuring out, okay, sometimes you might need to simplify things, in order to get to a better outcome. Mark, did you have any, stories along the lines of what, systems engineering means and how it relates to what Dave was saying?
Yeah, part of it is, taking a look at the big picture, what your scope is going to be. It's really easy with Splunk to start small and expand it and keep growing it. And then you realize a little too late that maybe that wasn't the best idea. What I inherited, we were bringing data in, and my first 5 years at Splunk, I never processed a single log file. We actually used Splunk for something else to process mission data. So we had JSON data come in, basically telling us about our business process, but it wasn't a syslog at all. It was all coming in as JSON, and everybody knows the easy button for Splunk is index extractions JSON and let it flow in, which is great when you're doing, say, under 10 gigabytes, which is what I started with. But when you start getting into 100 gigabytes or a terabyte a day of JSON data, the expansion from index extractions is huge. And if you don't look at that at the beginning, what's going to happen once I scale up? My proof of concept is done and it's working, I scale it by an order of magnitude what happens. So that's important. The other challenge we've run into is in our government customers, we usually have a virtual machine team that provides resources for us. So we have VMware, we're running on VMs, we request resources and whatnot. Well, sometimes they're not the most timely in their resource provisioning or complete. And you get issues like just DNS registration to get all your host names in, get your storage volumes right and stuff like that. So you have to really look at what are all the long poles, what can I short circuit as far as implementing it, and where am I risk for keeping the system running for high availability.
So I wanted to, I just had a thought, Burch, and I know you've got some questions lined up. I thought it might be neat to just do a quick poll of a couple of things that I've heard you guys say. It sounds like David might have the earliest experience with Splunk at 2009. What about the rest of you? When did you start learning about Splunk and using it?
Yeah, 2015 for me. Yeah, 2015.
13 for
15,
me.
16, yeah.
Yeah, I was 2012. Burch?
2012.
Okay, cool.
4.3.
And what about the largest environment that you touched?
Well, it's not the size of the environment. It's the data that you source type.
Let's see. Was it Mark had a 700 gig? What about Andre, David?
So I'm currently working on an 8 terabyte ES deployment. So
Nice.
It is interesting though, like the data inflation. So back in the day, my baby Splunk deployment was 4 gigabytes. And I remember pinching pennies like, well, what data can we take out? How do we make this work? And that type of thing. And now it's like 4 gigabytes is laughable, obviously, and 4 terabytes is maybe normal. Yeah.
Yeah, the largest Splunk environment that I've touched /worked on recently is about 115 terabytes in an AWS bring your own license. But it wasn't the ingestion that I thought was interesting. It was the fact that they were doing, I think, 6 million searches a day or something like that, maybe north of that in that environment, and it wasn't falling down.
Wow.
So that was all on one server?
Yes, one very large Z1D server in AWS.
Yeah.
Andre, Josh, or Brian?
For me, it's just under 1 terabyte was the last environment I worked on. In the field, most of the customers that I'm working with are thinking about 100, 200, 500 gigabytes maybe to get their hands in it. So that's why the environments, at least here where I'm working in, are pretty small. But there are good opportunities to grow them larger, and if they are. And most of the time, they are depending on us to tell them, okay, how do I set it up so that I really can scale it out on the next phases without introducing clustering as a next step. That was a huge thing for us back then.
All right, let's see what Brian has to say, and we'll go to Burch.
Sure. So somewhere around 60, 65 terabytes ES customer, not Splunk Cloud or any cloud. That was tons of fun. You had some old Windows machines, some Linux machines, and that was a mess to upgrade, especially with tight, 2-hour maintenance window gaps to upgrade, 60 indexers at a time, et cetera, et cetera. Tons of fun. And, but same story as David, a lot more searches on that data. It was all business data. So it was really cool. It was, without giving too much away, right? It was a rental business that everything you could think about renting or any question you could ask of the business, let alone infrastructure and security and all that, was in Splunk. So it was really an awesome experience. So a lot of work, but awesome experience.
So I think just kind of reading my engineering personality, I feel like each of us is probably coming to this recording with a bit of exuberance to share some kind of trick, or like, this is the first thing that I check when I inherited a deployment, or this is like whenever I go to work with a customer or work with a new deployment, it seems inevitably like this one particular thing is always wrong, and therefore I tend to make it one of the first things that I look at. Is there any sort of go-to thing that you have like that, or is there any sort of
David's raising his hand.
yeah, I'm sure. All right, David, we'll start with you, and Andre.
So I'm going to kind of piggyback on Hal's comment about systems engineering. Before any inherited environment or foreign environment is touched, number one question is, do you have backups of all of your config files that you use to manage this? And then before they even answer, have you ever tested restoring them? And if the answer is no, then there's a very frank and earnest discussion about doing that before we start touching and changing anything.
So you're saying like configuration of Splunk backup, because before you start messing around with stuff, you want to know that you have confidence in your ability to revert back?
That is exactly right, especially if
Okay,
you're going to be making changes through the GUI versus using some sort of like built-in version, external version control. A lot of customers are very enthusiastic about wanting to get in and look at things and tweak things and fix things. And then they realize, oh, that didn't work, but I don't exactly remember what was there before we started.
Yeah, let's test it in production.
Everybody has tests. Some people have production.
Yeah. So I think that's...
I want to go to Andre because he raised his hand also. And
I just to cap off what David was saying before we throw it to Andre. So that was a really good point, because I think you're right, people jump right into the config and trying to mess with stuff, and not having that responsibility could be a big break. Andre, what do you got?
There are two things actually that I'm asking. First is, do you have some kind of naming conventions actually in place for naming indexes, naming things within your environment, apps, whatever? This also goes over to how are their roles and permission concept and so on. And the other thing that I'm asking is, when was your last health check that you did with this environment? Because you might have a good environment, but our PS people can give you a pretty good overview what could be wrong with it or what could be improved with it. So this is something that I'm most of the time asking.
So we got to hand it off to Mark to explain what a health check is.
So the health check, the monitoring console has a built-in health check, which is pretty good. And it's actually amazing what it picks up. You configure your monitoring console, run the health check, and it looks at key configuration items and operations for Splunk. And it points out the inevitable: you didn't set your transparent huge pages correctly, you didn't set your U limits correctly, lots of stuff like that in the health check. And it's really, the way I approach performance overall is the whack-a-mole theory, is you look for the really outliers first, and health check is a good place to start. Like, don't try and tweak and tune your system unless you set the base correctly. So health check helps you with that a lot.
So there's health check the feature, but there's also health check the service offering, which I wanted to make sure that we were clear for the customers that, and maybe it's different in public sector, but there's a 1 week, it's 1 or 2 week service offering that's, hey, come in and document what the environment is like and help to define what those outliers are.
But blah, 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 blah. But before Mark expands on that, you bring up a really good point, which is like, I mean, one of the best things that can come out of this podcast is someone learning that they are empowered to make a positive change right now. Specifically for Splunk, but sure, positive change in your life, that works too. But knowing that,
Splunk
the monitoring console has a health check, you could run it now. Doesn't mean you're changing things. It just means you're kind of auditing, and you can get a sense of what you might need to work on before you then queue up what Mark's about to talk about. Mark?
Yeah, I've only done one health check. We had one customer, they had a running system, so we started with the health check. I spent 4 weeks there doing some other work for them. But basically, you're looking at, okay, how did we deploy the system? What are your requirements? What is the base configuration on how it operates? And are there anything in the configuration that is really a limiting factor on how well the system works? And it's kind of a straightforward process. In professional services, we have basically a guide that we follow to do all those steps and check off the little squares. But it really is a useful exercise to know what you have and get a really good idea of what it is you have to address going forward to make your system better. So, the goal is everybody has a system that works well, and they're getting their data and doing their searches and not getting frustrated about it. So, and there are a lot of little things we can do to make it less frustrating.
So, Brian, you have any thoughts on the health check, the kind of the getting started? What would you do first? I just inherited this.
Yeah, a couple things. I haven't raised my hand because I can't decide between three, but I promise I'll keep that to 3 sentences. One, a big one that I always see is, no one pays attention to timestamps or line breaking, which is like my favorite thing to do, apparently. Written a couple blogs about how to do it. It's fun. The second one, U limits, always. I'm sure David's like cringing inside. And the third one is for enterprise security customers, or really just anyone using a common information model. There are a bunch of macros to identify which indexes which data live in, like your authentication data, your network traffic data, et cetera. When that's not enabled, we hog a lot of resources we don't need to. So that is like, we have a dashboard built on my team that just plug it in an environment. Yes, there's the monitoring console stuff, but I like to customize things. So that's just how I do things. But either way, a lot of the time what I find is I'd be a fool if I didn't say this, just from the experience of having to manage Splunk myself and having to, be responsible for the performance. Is Splunk Cloud has been like the answer to all my health checks, right? It's a lot easier. I won't harp on anything like that, but I've had to report to CISOs and CTOs, and you go in their office on a Friday to show all your cool dashboards, and if things are slow because you're running on half the IOPS in your VMware environment or something like that, I've just had a lot more success in the cloud. So that's the end of my rant. Thanks.
So I want to go back to something Andre said. Andre, you pointed out roles. You said naming convention and roles, and I want to hear more about why. What's the risk of having poorly defined roles? And I'll buy you another second by sharing an experience when I inherited an environment. One of the multiple environments I inherited as a customer. One of the more comical things is all the settings were really screwy. Like someone was in there that didn't really know what they were doing. And then finally it dawned on me, every single user in LDAP in the system was mapped to the admin role. So that was why all the settings were so screwy. We had like the CTO logging in and being like, I want to increase my search concurrency or whatever, So cleaning up that, it became a really interesting thing, because the harder part, well, it wasn't that hard, but the harder part of that was actually not making the setting change. Like that is a pretty straightforward thing. Okay, I'm going to make that setting change, clean that up, and then start to clean up the mess that resulted. But it was the political part. I needed to make sure that I communicated out to everyone. Here's what's going to be happening. You're going to be losing this access, dealing with anyone who was going to push back on it, making sure that my management was prepared for this dramatic change that I would be making. And so I think I go to share that both to buy you time, but also to point out that some of the things about inheriting an environment could be human factor, not so much the technology.
Yeah. Absolutely, and the thing that I saw in a lot of cases also with the new customers now is we have to explain them the possibilities of permission setting in Splunk from user perspective. They come on the Splunk website on a search it, and then they have a lot of possibilities. So from my point of view, there are I would say three main dimensions setting permissions. One is have access to certain indices, the buckets where the data is in. So this has to be organized somehow, maybe for apps that you have, maybe for environments that you have, whatever. So the naming conventions comes in, and then also you set up roles with that. Then the other dimension is having the apps with the dashboards working on this data from the indexes. So that's the second dimension that we have. And the third dimension is the capabilities. What can I do? Am I an admin? I'm a standard user, power user? What capabilities do I have in this environment? And to organize all three of them is really, really hard, because if you see this cube that spans up, and then you see that there are a lot of crosses that you can match with your users. And if you then go into the LDAP, and if you connect it to the LDAP and say to the LDAP, yeah, we have 100 indexes, about 50 apps for each and every group, and then we have three different three different roles. Then you have thousands of groups that you have in your LDAP, and the LDAP admin says you are crazy, you're not with my system. So the thing that I use often is to explain, okay, imagine the dashboards without access to data are empty, and the data without dashboards are pretty lame. So why not combine at least two of these dimensions and have those somehow be the permission put together? So one app and the indexes that the data is from, and the other dimension would be divided into three parts: the capabilities, and admin, power user, standard user. So with that, you only have two dimensions that you really have to care about and that you have to put into your LDAP. So that's really, really easy then to comprehend all of these possibilities.
So I can't stop myself but to also call out that if you go to lantern.splunk.com, you can find an article called Managing Data Based on Role. And in that, we talk about, we build on what you just said and actually call out 5 aspects of roles. Yeah, so data access, like you said, indexes, search restrictions, product feature capabilities, knowledge object permissions, and then what their default app is. And just like you said, once you start to realize that even though within Splunk it's called role is actually like 5 different functional things in one, it allows you to take a step back and have a more mature and sophisticated approach on your data management. So I love that point. Yeah. Hal, you had a
Burch. I think we've just defined what a next episode is going to be. Splunk Lantern. Going into depth there.
Sure.
Yeah, so I wanted to know what are some of the worst messes that you have come across, and how did you start to get a handle on it? Let's go to Brian first, but I know that David's going to have a bunch as well. Brian, you want to talk about removing TAs in production?
Yeah, thanks for not making us all follow up David on this one, because I'm sure he's got some great stories. I think I was trying to decide what was the most horrible thing I've ever seen. And apparently one time someone removed the Palo Alto TA from like 15, 20 indexers, the whole fleet, right? The whole cluster, and didn't do anything about it for like 2-3 weeks or however long. It wasn't even noticed somehow. So for anyone that doesn't know, what that's going to do, especially for an enterprise security customer, is remove any kind of source types, right? Everything's going to show as pan log instead of traffic, thread, et cetera, all those field extractions, line breaks, timestamps, tags, event types, you name it, anything you want to do besides look at a raw block of text, you need that there. So a couple of weeks later, we said, all right, well, if we reapply this TA, it's not going to retroactively fix anything because these are index time extractions. So the fix ended up being Script
Real quick, I'm sorry. Let's define
sure.
index time versus search time extraction for the audience.
Sure. Yeah.
Should we do the index time? Should we define the index time ones before the podcast starts and then the search ones right now?
Yeah, but it's too late because we already started the podcast.
Yeah, we'll do it on the fly.
Some Python will fix that. So index time extractions, meaning when data comes into Splunk and is written to disk, some things are extracted or handled, meaning line breaking, time stamping, associating the host source type index fields. I might miss one or call an extra one. Apologies. But that's index time extraction. So that's the only thing you ever want to set up pretty much at the beginning of indexing data to Splunk, right? Everything else is schema on the fly, schema at read, meaning, you want to extract the source IP, create a field alias, do something like that. All that can be done either on the fly or in configuration file at the time the data is read from disk. So it doesn't have to be pre-configured. Is that a accurate statement for the Dream Team here? Okay, cool.
Don't forget truncation. You don't want to be slicing your events off at the knees.
He actually...
That's always a zero, that one?
he had truncation in there. We just ran out of time.
Yeah. Truncated my log too early.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the removing of the TA is going to break all of these things. There's no knowledge objects added at index time. You might have truncated events or the inverse, right? If the line breaks are off or event breaks are off.
Did you say it happened on both the search heads and the indexers?
Just the indexers, but it didn't matter, right? I mean,
right, because none of the search time stuff was working once it wasn't properly indexed.
So, right, because go ahead, Al.
I was just going to say, let's focus on so you found it. How did you get a handle on it? What was next?
Yeah, the next thing was, first of all, as soon as you can, apply the correct version TA to the indexers. So any future data, we can have a stopgap, right? So any future data is correctly sourced.
Stop the bleeding.
Stop the bleeding, right? Band-aid on the bullet hole, on the bullet wound, right? So after that, the solution was, the fix was, how do we retroactively fix this data? Because we don't know if we're vulnerable to any type of security incident for the last multiple days. We'll leave it at that. So the solution was we had to run a search to extract that data, the raw log, then somehow re-inject it into Splunk. And this is like terabytes and terabytes of data for what it's worth. And with the TA on it, right? So we had to spin up a heavy forwarder, kind of out of band, heavy forwarder search head of that index cluster, and then just kind of programmatically pull it, write it to disk, and have a universal forwarder kind of monitor on that same box and pump it back into Splunk, right? There's a million different ways you can do that. But the point is, we had to take terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data via Python out and pump it back in to fix that. So index time extractions are somewhat
wow. Okay. Let's have the rest of you reflect on that. Anything interesting there? And then we'll pick up a new story.
I had one.
All right, Mark.
Yeah, so I had one. It's actually not the Splunk part, but I inherited a system that was deployed with Ansible, and they had a whole set of playbooks to deploy everything, managed not a cluster, but a distributed deployment. It was 8 standalone indexers. And playbook was great and whatnot. The only problem with the playbooks is that there was no error checking in them. And secondarily, our development system was not configured the same as the production system. So the test run of an update to some indexes on the dev system worked fine, applied it to the production system, and we lost all access to all data because there was an error. It wasn't trapped in Ansible. It managed to get through and remove all the definitions of every index, but not add the one new one we needed. So fortunately, it's recoverable. But if you're making Ansible playbooks, make sure you put error checking in there and don't commit it until it's actually correct.
So, Andre, you mentioned using Terraform in a prior life. You want to talk a little bit about automating Splunk configuration and maybe the dangers of?
Maybe I should, because it was the time when we tried to put a hybrid environment, because the idea was to store the data where it's generated. So I have an on-prem Splunk environment and an AWS Splunk environment. So we needed something in AWS that is Splunk, to not have all the data over the wire. And with that, I needed, because I was new to Terraform, and Splunk can be really complicated to set up. I really had to put, I would say, 6 months into understanding how Terraform works, how AWS works at the same time, how to Ansible all of this within Terraform, and then drill it into AWS so it doesn't cost us too much money, and then to create all the connections to this AWS instance from all the other AWS accounts. So it was a pretty hard lesson to learn, but in the end, I can say, hey, I know how to Terraform Splunk and how to put all of the stuff in there and how to actually design this from scratch and do whatever I wanted, whatever I wasn't able to do within our on-prem network, because there were so many restrictions and stuff in there that I wasn't able to come over, because there were people involved, like network people and so on. They had their own ideas. So it's really good. You can do pretty much whatever you want, but you really have to be careful what you do in there. If you bring your own license to a cloud environment and put it in there, because one number set the wrong way and you spin up a lot of instances that cost a lot of money, and this money is then you have to pay for it. If you ever made the error or not, no one cares. You have to pay for it at that point.
All right, so
David, I feel like we've held you in the cage long enough. Let's break class in case of emergency.
That's okay. So I break these down. I'm going to take a cue from Brian in 3 categories: hardware, software, and wetware. So software, I'll start with. One of the most interesting environments I found had 2 search head clusters with a total of 4,000 available search slots. One of those clusters had 2,800 searches scheduled on a single minute, 12:04 p.m. every day. That was the worst minute of the day, but by far not the only one. North of 2,500 searches scheduled. They had just
how many slots did they have, just for reference?
4,000 search slots.
Okay.
Yeah, it was they were using 10 searches per CPU plus base searches, and it was really a monster. The way we got it under control, started with allow SKU, set it to 5 minutes globally. We then turned on the scheduler window, set it to auto.
Sorry, what did you set to 5 minutes globally?
Allow SKU. Yep, for scheduled searches. We also went into the data model accelerations and changed the acceleration allow SKU, which also exists, but most folks don't use it or know about it.
So explain allow SKUs.
Yeah, and then I want to know, is there a reason to not use it?
The Splunk scheduler, when you say schedule once a minute or once every 5 minutes, will generally try to kick off searches at the very beginning of each minute, so the 0th or 1st second of every minute. That means you get a whole bunch of congestion at the very top of each minute, and you end up with these sawtooth patterns of your indexer utilization. Allow SKU, which can be set as a percentage of time, like 50% SKU or a number of minutes, says go ahead and use all the seconds in an hour, all the seconds in a minute for your scheduling. So for example, if I set allow SKU to 5 minutes, that tells Splunk any search that is scheduled for 5 minutes or less often, so scheduled for 5 minutes or more, you have a 300-second window to run that search whenever the system is as least busy as possible. So it gives the scheduler a lot more flexibility to move searches around to more evenly balance out the system. If your search runs more frequently than 5 minutes, then allow SKU is limited to the frequency of search. So if you have a 5-minute SKU and you run a search every 2 minutes, well, we'll only SKU it a maximum of 2 minutes. So what that means is your search will run every 5 minutes, maybe at 37 seconds past the minute, but it'll be the same 37 seconds every 5 minutes. So you don't end up losing any data and you don't miss any of your data windows.
Is it still considered if you're doing something like that, even though it tries to keep it at that consistent time, is it still best practice to use the snap twos so that you know you're consistently starting and ending at the top of the minute or whatever, regardless of when the SKU runs?
Absolutely. So snap twos are awesome, and if you're going to be using snap twos for things like a 15-minute search or a search runs, earliest 5 minutes and latest now, don't run it as minus 5 minutes at minute. Run it as minus 6 minutes at minute for earliest, and then latest as minus 1 minute at minute. Give your events, your straggler events, a few extra seconds to get ingested into Splunk. So when you run that search, you don't miss them because you may not catch them on the second run.
Your point being that you could have lag. Some data might be showing up now that didn't just happen now. It could have happened a full minute ago, and it's just coming into the indexers now.
And you want to be able to try and catch that in your searches. Exactly.
Brief interjection. ITSI takes that into account, and there's a step where you can basically have it evaluate your lag and then suggest a lag, and you put that into the KPI searches that it generates, and it will take care of that fix that you just said, basically.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's pretty neat, especially if it pays attention to whenever that lag changes, especially if it gets longer versus
That's
getting
a good
shorter.
Question. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Yeah. So that was the software. Hardware wise, the worst thing I ran into is a indexing cluster that has a mix of spinning Rust and SSD. It was all supposed to be SSD, and somebody goofed on the ordering process. And so when you have 4 5,400 RPM drives in a RAID 6 configuration on your indexers, you get a whopping 150 IOPS out of an indexer. It doesn't take very long to make that indexer crawl. It turns out buying more of them with that same broken configuration really doesn't make Splunk go any faster. The fix for that was surprisingly simple. We basically removed the poorly configured indexers out of ingestion rotation and just let the SSD-based ones pick up the slack, and removing 5/7, so 5 of 7 indexers out of the cluster, brought the system back to almost instant response time. And so the 2 indexers that were left, they were busy, but they could handle it, and the customer was ecstatic that we got this fixed so quickly.
So it's almost counterintuitive. What I'm hearing is you would think, oh, well, I don't want to take 5/7 of my indexers out of commission. My performance is going to suck. But because they had such poorly defined disks that they were both indexing and returning search results from, it actually became more performant by not having them. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. Removing multiple bottlenecks, multiple parallel bottlenecks in the process. Absolutely.
So who wants to talk about search completion and how that would affect the end user in such an environment? I can, or David.
Search completion.
I mean, your search is not going to finish until all the indexers have said that they're done with the job. So the slowest one is going to kind of hold you back.
That's true. You also run into scenarios where the indexer is so busy, the search basically times out. So that it's really painful. And there were many dashboards in the dozens of panels range that, of course, just trashed these indexers. And the customer couldn't figure out that even at like 3 a.m. on Sunday when nobody was using the system, everything was still slow. So that was pretty painful. So the real lesson there is when you're looking at hardware, it's another. This is sort of another reason that Splunk Cloud solves hardware and infrastructure problems. When you're buying hardware and you put it online, make really sure you get what you think you paid for and what you ordered. Because if somebody accidentally flips a couple letters and you don't catch it, you can end up with a very unperformant system. And then the last one is wetware. And so this is a two-parter. The first one is basically one that I'm sure most of us have seen. The Splunk admin or admin team is effectively overwhelmed.
I have never heard of wetware. Just throwing that out there.
You've never heard of wetware? Hardware, software, and wetware. The three legs of
is wetware the people?
Yeah. The wetware is the people. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So admin teams with large user communities, and Burch may know something about large user communities, you can get overwhelmed if you don't delegate out some of the responsibility to your power users and empower individuals on various teams as knowledge owners and data domain experts. So you can kind of push out the help that your customers, your internal users are going to ask for to other folks. And then the one that was very cringy was ran into an admin who was using search head clustering. They had 5 nodes, but they didn't trust the deployer, so they'd manually log into every search head cluster node and manually edit files when they wanted to change something. But sometimes they get distracted and they wouldn't remember to edit all 5 files. Sometimes they get 4 or 3. Sometimes it was 1. And then they'd restart nodes, but not all of them. Sometimes, and was really frustrated that they couldn't seem to understand why their environment was really inconsistent. And about 15 minutes into asking them to make a change so I can watch it, it was pretty obvious what was going on. And then it became, this isn't a software problem, this is an education problem. And it's this is an easy problem to fix, but one of the things
sounds like we lost David's audio.
Huh?
David, your audio is messed up.
No, he's good. Just you.
Unless it's me.
Just you? Yeah.
Just you.
Yeah, so the real recommendation was you need to create a small test environment so you can experiment and learn and play. So you're not training yourself in production, where when you make mistakes, it's really hard to figure it out, and it's even harder to recover from. So, some of the stuff is complicated, some of it's simple, but the reality is I can't remember who coined it, but custy's going to custy, and there's never a dull moment when you've got Splunk customers that are doing interesting things.
I had one time a CISO came to me and opened up a security ticket and said, "Hey, Splunk is promoting all our passwords in clear time to everyone, or in clear text to everyone." I made a look into it and saw that a developer had an environment dump in front of whatever he was doing, and in the environment dumps usually there are passwords in there to connect to databases, and the solution for that was also a very wet one. We slapped the developer on the hands and said, "You never have to ever again dump an environment into a log file." So that was the solution.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Burch.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, cool.
Okay.
So I had some weird audio issues there for a second. We've only got a few minutes left. I want to make sure that we had a chance for people to just like, if you have to tell somebody, who's in an inheriting system, one tip, what was that going to be? Mark, let's kind of start with you and say,
like your walk away advice.
Yeah.
So walk away. If you inherit, most of the people who inherit it don't have a lot of training. So get your own base training first, so you know what it is that you're looking at. And then secondly, take a minute and make an assessment of what your deployment is, what it has, and figure out why it's doing what it's doing before you change it.
Awesome. Brian, same question.
Yeah, I think the big thing, and maybe it's not a piece of Splunk advice as it is rather just a practicing being a technician type of thing. I've messed up environments worse than kind of half of the stories we've already told when I first started becoming a Splunker, right? So, like really bad, I don't even want to share. But at the same time, inheriting environments, people do things different ways. Just because something looks different does not mean it's necessarily wrong. If you want to prove someone wrong, pull up btool. But yeah, btool's great for, obtaining new environments. But the big thing is, for anyone that's, not a genius Splunker, so to speak, there's always more training. Education is super valuable. I mean, it definitely got us sore just doing it to where we are today, right? So, I mean, that's just an important thing to remember.
All right, Andre, last words.
Last words. Okay. From my point of view, if you inherit something, don't assume anything. Get a PS health check. They will give you everything you need to know about your environment and what's wrong with it, what you have to concentrate on first when you get it. That would be my advice.
Awesome. David?
So I'm going to piggyback on Andre a bit. While you are waiting for that PS health check to happen, there is a Splunk doc page called Inheriting Environments, and it is a great, fantastically thorough checklist of things to look at in a brand new environment that you haven't seen before. You can find it with the word Splunk and inherited in Google. I'd say use Bing, but
well, actually,
nobody uses Bing.
Our next episode is going to be talking to the authors of that document and working through some of those.
Excellent. Yes, that is a fantastic document. I had a very, very small fingertip in helping to put that together years ago. But I recommended that document to many people because it solves the problem of what do I look for, right? You told me to go look for stuff. Well, that's a long list, and I don't want to have to remember it. So that's it.
A companion to David.
No, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, a companion to David is then Splunk Wiki, Things I Wish I Knew Then, which is a really good summary.
Yeah. And so I want to stitch together a couple things I heard. Definitely the docs. Definitely when you first step into this role, if there's some education you need to do, don't keep putting it off. Just register for it right away because the class may not be scheduled again for another month or two. So you don't want to snooze and lose. You want to get on that right away. And then like Andre and I think Brian said, I know there are certainly people that inherited my environments after I left, especially my lab where I was doing some really hippie stuff. And I later had heard like, we don't know what the heck we were doing here. There were symlinks everywhere and stuff. And it was like, run btool. If all else fails, run btool and you'll fully understand what's going on. But it brings up a good point of like document, right? And so I left people in the lurch by Burch because I didn't document things. Cool.
Bad Burch, no biscuit.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, this was an incredible session. Thank you all for meeting at your, Andre's the only one who had a slightly inconvenient time. The rest of us are all in the same time
it's
zone.
Perfect for me.
That was not.
I would always do it for you.
Thank you. But this was really great. I'm excited to hear what kind of fan feedback we get on this session, and I look forward to the follow up where hopefully we can meet with the doc writers of that manual. So great way of queuing that up. Hal, anything else?
Nope. I mean, thank you, all of you, for your time. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm sure that everybody will get something out of it.
Awesome. Great. Well, happy splunking. Bye, everyone.